I have genuine concerns about this bill and where it's going and what it's going to do for renters in this country. I mean, I'm already concerned about affordability. I mean, rents are very, very high all over the country, particularly in urban areas, but elsewhere as well. And it seems that there was no sort of impact study done on this bill before it was produced as to what it was going to do to rents. And the way I see it is the rents are only going to go one way. So if you've had someone, and in many landlords in my constituency are small landlords, they might have a number of properties and they're generally fairly fair, the most of them. And they might get a nice family into rent, so they want to keep that family there, and they may not have risen the rent in quite some years. And then suddenly this legislation comes in, it's going to change how things are done, and you can only raise it for new tenancies every 6 years. So if the tenants that they have moved out for whatever reason, and new tenants are moving in after the 1st of March, they're naturally going to raise the rent because they're not going to be able to raise it for another 6 years and may not have raised it for quite some time before that. And I know many landlords in those circumstances. I mean, one landlord was telling me he's a number of properties. He was only charging €800 for his property to a family, whereas his both neighbours, one side was $1,500, the other side was $1,600 for the same size of house. He had not raised his rent. He actually wasn't that type. He just said, look, I'm not greedy. I'm not trying to profiteer off ordinary people. I don't think it's fair. But he will obviously take the opportunity to raise it some, not even maybe as high as his neighbours, but to some. But many landlords are going to raise the rent when they got the opportunity to what we call market value. Now, looking at the figures from the Residential Tenancies Board, the average rent in each county, they have an average rent for each county. So we know there's obviously some rents that's lower, many rents much higher. And then they have an average market rent. Going on those figures, it is possible that people may end up paying up to $3,500 extra a year in the first year and for subsequent years after that in a new tenancy in Cavan, in my county. I mean, I don't know where they're going to get the money from. I'm hearing from families whose landlords, and indeed many of them, because of this legislation, because it's so confusing, are selling up and have issued eviction notices to people, and up to this have been charging them a reasonably fair rent. And they come into my office and they say, where am I going to find a rental that I can afford? And they can't. They're looking. There's very little availability, and what is available is very expensive. These people, many are above the HAP rates. They're above the social housing threshold. So they're going to have to go on the private rental market without any sort of financial support, and they can't find anywhere. So they're left with a situation: do they go into homeless accommodation? Do they try and bunk in with family, squashed into one bedroom? It's an absolute nightmare for them. And as I said, this legislation, I don't think it's not well thought out whatsoever, and it's going to have an extreme impact on rents in the private rental sector. On students as well, like students, I mean, I'm about to see my son go off to college, hopefully in September. And he's going to be looking for a rented accommodation. And we know there's very little student-specific accommodation or on-campus accommodation. If he's lucky enough to get that, and it's not cheap either, that'll be great. But if he's not, he's dependent on the private rented market. And if you move into a new tenancy every year, because most students go and they look and seek a 9-month tenancy. So they move into the house, whatever the rent is, they move out, then they have to get another new tenancy for the following year. It's going to be raised again and again and again. I don't know how I'm going to afford that if that's what's going to happen next year for my son. And I know many other families are going to be in exactly the same position. And I think this is only going to drive homelessness higher, because already we're talking about in excess of 16,000, 5,000 of them children. And that's not even counting the people I've already talked about bunking into the family box room, or lying on the sofa of their friend's house, or in domestic violence shelters, or lying on the street. There are a lot more homeless than we actually see in those figures that are accessing emergency accommodation. And that figure, again, is only going to rise because more and more people are going to be out on the street because they cannot afford the rent as it is, and this bill is going to drive rents up. So we need we should have had proper analysis of any sort of legislation like this on what it's going to do to the rental market, and we need regular monitoring and reporting of this bill as we go forward. Thank you.